So, welcome everyone. Retrofit opportunities with Loxone. Um, what I want to emphasize really before we get started is Loxone is very much looked at as a home automation and building automation solution, which obviously is correct. But we can also look at as Loxone in a few different product categories. Um, if you look at other solutions or other systems on the market, you will come across ones that are primarily focused in lighting. You'll come across things that are primarily focused in the climate control, heating and cooling, audio, then access control. Whereas with, of course, with Loxon, we know that you can do it all with one system. But that's not to say that if your customer only needs a lighting control solution, you can't use Loxon. Of course you can. Same with heating and cooling, same with audio, same with access control, and more. This is all about retrofitting because we've come to a point in today's day and age where we are staying in our homes for longer. We're not necessarily buying a new home or completely renovating back to brick where we can run new cables. So we're all about looking at home improvements and renovation, similar to what everyone did when we were all fed up of looking at the same four walls in lockdown. But it's more about the home improvements now and see how we can not just aesthetically improve it, but also functionally improve it as well. And the same goes for buildings as well in terms of commercial applications. So of course, we're all aware about the energy crisis. It seems to be coming down a little bit now, especially in the residential sector, but commercial is still very much going to be affected by it because the new energy price cap isn't affecting commercial. Um, so we can have these sort of discussions as we go. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll go through them. At the end, we'll have a bit of a Q&A as well. So let's get cracking. So firstly, let's start with lighting. Now with lighting, we've got various different approaches. So you've got 230 volts. 230 volts is, of course, what you're going to come across most likely when you're doing retrofits or looking at a solution that you can offer to a customer in a retrofit instance. So let's start off with the nano products, let's call them. So the nano IO, I'm sure everyone's used a nano IO before. We know it's got two relays, hence with the picture, it's got two relays. These are 5 amp relays, so sufficient for most light circuits in both in a room within a commercial building or also residentially. Now, what's also worth noting is the digital inputs. So many people, of course, they've seen the digital input terminals there. It's very clear that they're labeled digital inputs. You've got 6 of them. But the potential of what you can use them for, because when you're powering the Nano IO with mains, so you've got your live and neutral going into the AC supply, on the digital input side, you will then have 24 volts at 1 watt on the output. So this means that you could use it for a push button or a PIR or something like this, that you're just closing a contact into a digital input. You could use it for water sensors. You could use it for door and window contacts because all of these aren't really drawing any power. It's more just the continuity and closing that contact. So that's one really important thing to think about for lighting. Now, of course, if you don't have neutrals in the back box, you can, of course, put this in the ceiling. There are enclosures out there that you can use to pop these in the ceiling as well. But one thing to consider as well is loads of people still have those single ceiling rose pendants. Now, of course, on their own, they're not particularly like nice looking. But the cover that's usually covering the terminals, you can very easily find replacements online for maybe 2, 3, 4, maybe £5, which are much, I say much larger. They're larger in the fact that when they're installed, you can't really notice the difference, but they're allowing you so much more room for fitting a device like the Nano IO or the Nano Dimmer. So it's very much worth a consideration. Now, continuing on with the topic of mains and the primary lighting in the room, the Dali Air. Now, Dali, you can find Dali in some higher end properties, but if you're looking at a higher end property with Dali lighting, 9 times out of 10, they will have some sort of lighting control system in there already. So this is going to be more for the application of commercial. Now, Dali lighting is very common, but a lot of the time you'll find that if there's Dali light fittings in a commercial application, in an office or something else, they might not actually be using the DALI functionality, very common in car showrooms as well. So what you can do instead is you can offer more features your to your potential customer, because adding this DALI Air is going to give them more control. You can automate it, of course, with all the features that Loxone offers. And of course, they've got the Loxone app now, and all of the external monitoring. But perhaps yes, they've got their DALI light fittings, and they might have some DALI 2 PIRs or DALI 2 switches. Now, of course, I would have loved for us to use the Loxone Touch or Touch Pure Flex or Touch Pure, and the presence sensor, of course. But when you're doing retrofits and renovations, it's always great to make use of what we've got there already. And that could then open up the potential in the future where the customer has the trust in you and they want to expand their solution. So no longer are they just looking at lighting, they may now be looking for audio. If you think again in a car showroom, start with the lighting. It's really important that you've got the correct light levels in there so that we're saving energy. But also, we need to make sure that these vehicles are presented nicely in line with the company's corporate identity. So we could then look at audio and presentations and things like this. So yeah, the DALI Air, really valuable. Only 10 devices, not 64 devices, but when you're doing retrofitting, you'll find that this will be more than sufficient anyway. And also you've got the DALI broadcast opportunity as well. So if you had this on a DALI bus and you just wanted all of the devices on the DALI bus to react, you could just send a broadcast command to on or 80% or whatever, and that would just work. And then, of course, the ceiling light. The ceiling light is a fantastic product. Again, replacing those instances in a property, again, can be commercial or residential, where you've got a single light fitting in the room and you want to upgrade it. Now, with the ceiling light, it's a ceiling light, so it's going to work on and off, but also dimmable, but fully RGBW, and it has the built-in motion sensor and the brightness sensor. So with this in mind, it's very much plug and play. You remove the existing fitting, fit this up. Several of my colleagues have also got these at home. And the sort of installation process is very, very simple in the fact that it takes maybe 5-10 minutes to install. And you don't even need to open up Loxone config to pair it. You can open up the app on your phone, do an Air device search on the Loxone app, and pair the device, which is really, really powerful. And finally, the smart socket. The smart socket has got so many different potential applications. But naturally for lighting, you're going to look at things like lamps and other things that would traditionally be manually controlled or put into a socket. Now, this would be nice to have in a residential setting, where you can automatically schedule these lamps to turn on and off and things like this. But in more larger scale applications where there's responsibility issues, who's in charge to actually turning this off and not leaving it on, saving energy and things, that's where the smart socket really has its value, especially in things like hotels. I've grown up in hospitality industry myself, with parents running various different venues. And I walked into one of the company's hotel rooms, the lamps are just left on 24/7 because they have the standard that they want the guest to walk in as they first arrive. The radio is on and the lamp is on and a couple of other things. But that room could be unoccupied for days, if not weeks, in some seasons where they're not particularly busy. So having something like a smart socket could be really, really important. Now we've looked at mains. Now let's look at the DC side, so 12 or 24 volts. So you'll notice, of course, I've kept here the Nano IO. And what we've just discussed a moment ago with the Nano IO, you need to power it with 230 volts, you're live and neutral. So many people potentially haven't come across this use case before, where on the digital input side, you can see here that you've got the ground terminal and you have the 24-volt terminal. Now, with the 24-volt terminal on ground, you can actually, instead of it just outputting 24 volts, you can input 24 volts. So now this device is operational without the mains going into it. This means that, of course, it can be paired. This could be useful for like pre-commissioning on site, but also means that these relays become dry contacts. So you're not just switching mains because of what you're powering it with. You can now switch 12 or 24 volts or whatever voltage you want, really. Of course, it's a 5 amp relay, but you could put 12 volts in and switch to 12-volt circuits or 24 volts. It's important to note, though, that if you do power it at 24 volts, you just don't use the neutral terminals, only the live terminals. The table lamp is the table lamp. It's, of course, hopefully going to be released or shipping, sorry, from July. It's unique in the fact that it's not, with all of the other Loxone lighting products, they are, I guess you could refer to them as tethered. You need to have them connected to a power supply, whereas the table lamp has an integral battery so that it could be moved around. Again, primarily for applications like restaurants where having a lamp on the table is quite a nice added addition, especially to the aesthetic. And also, I mean, I've got glasses, I'm a bit blind for the best of times, so reading a menu with a lamp is quite useful. Otherwise, I have my phone out with the torch. And it also has controls, so you could offer a version where you have like controls to turn the lamp on and off, and control perhaps dimming levels, or you could, if it was in a residential setting, control the volume of the audio. It's got an integral battery charged with USB-C, and is a great quality product. Now, PWM. PWM is becoming more and more popular, more and more common. I'm sure we've all got perhaps LED strips at home, or under cabinet lighting, whether it's little spotlights or strip lights or whatever. 99% of the time they're running at 12 or 24 volts. However, you would be familiar with using a driver, which you're giving it mains, you're switching on the main side, and you are just switching that transformer, and that's then controlling or driving the LED fitting. All LEDs will be running at some sort of DC voltage, but there will be a transformer of some sort as well. Same with like your conventional GU10 bulbs. They're LED. LEDs are DC, but there will be a transformer inside essentially. But if you can control it from the DC side, so same with all LED strips and things like this, that's what the RGBW dimmer is great for. Now, the name RGBW potentially could be a little misleading in the fact that it can be used for 4 individual channels, because of course you had red, green, blue, white, which is 4 channels. And we can now use these for 3 different circuits, 3 different rooms if we wanted to. Now, the RGBW dimmer Air on the DIN rail form, of course, that's going to be somewhat limiting you to be more centrally wiring. However, the RGBW dimmer Air enables you, sorry, the compact version enables you to locate it in more flexible areas, perhaps in a cupboard or under the cabinet, and have a local power supplies. Spencer, I think you just mentioned why not 4 circuits? So yeah, the RGBW dimmer Air can be used as 4 different individual channels, 4 different circuits if you wanted to, not just RGBW. So you could use this for some Loxone sell the PWM spots, which are just, of course, warm white. So you could use the RGBW dimmer to drive those. Of course, you could switch them at 24 volts if you wanted to, but it allows some flexibility. We have, what else do we have here? We've also got the nano motor controller. So the nano motor controller, you may be thinking, well, this is for driving motors. Why would it be here relating to lighting? Now, the nano motor controller has got a few different operation modes. For example, like the Nano 2 relay tree, you've got it for shading or universal, and then you have 2 relays you can use for anything. The nano motor controller, you have the option for bidirectional motors or unidirectional motors, but you'll also have it as a PWM controller. So if you need a PWM controller for lighting and not just driving something else, the nano motor controller is perfect for this. Now, the nano motor controller is priced at around £115, £120, whereas the RGBW dimmer is priced at around £75. So you may be thinking, why am I spending the best part of another 30, 40 pounds where I'm only getting one channel as opposed to four channels. And to be honest with you, if you can use the RGBW dimmer, then you may be better off because you've then got four circuits instead of just the one. The difference is the form factor. The nano motor controller is much smaller. There we go, nice bit of automation for the shading. So yeah, the nano motor controller is a smaller form factor, but also the frequency. So the PWM frequency, how frequently the on and off cycles happen, is 400 hertz on the nano motor controller, whereas on the RGBW dimmer, it's 123. So the higher the number, the more frequent that on and off cycle is happening. It's the same sort of technology that your phone screen or your computer screen will be using. Which is why perhaps if you're filming a phone screen, it sometimes looks like it's flickering, and that's because of the frame rate of your camera versus the frequency for the PWM driver. So for single channels, the nano motor controller is great. Note that the nano motor controller is also a device that has the same current output as the RGBW dimmer. So it's still 2.1 amps or 50 watts at 24 volts. Just keep that in mind. So that's pretty much lighting for retrofitting. You can tackle any instance, whether it's mains, switch or dimming, or whether it's DC. Now let's look at heating and cooling. Now heating and cooling can be such a vast and large topic. So again, you'll notice I've kept the RGBW dimmer here and the Nano IO and the smart socket. So what could these all be differently used for? So let's start off with the Nano IO. We already now know that the Nano IO can be powered with 24 volts and it can operate as fault-free contacts. So these can now be used for driving pumps or valves or, well, actuators or two-port valves, etc., or three-port valves. And by using the Nano IO in this form, means you can switch any voltage because you may come across a pump which is 24 volts, or you may come across a pump which or a valve which is 12 or 24 volts, and the Nano IO gives you that flexibility. Of course, you need a transformer because we don't just have 24 volts around the property normally. But instead of having two transformers, one for a valve and one for a pump, you can just have one for the device and away you go. Of course, you could use the Nano IO for controlling higher loads than 5 amps for things like immersion heaters. But of course, it is only rated to 5 amps. So you want to consider things like a contactor in between the Nano IO and the load, so you're protecting the device. Now, RGBW dimmer, we're not going to be dimming any heating or cooling because that's a bit strange and wouldn't be possible. So what could this be used for? Now, we know already the benefits for lighting, but let's think about things a little bit more outside of the box. So I mentioned a moment ago, immersion heaters. Now, immersion heaters usually are just on or off, and they're rated up to maybe 3 kilowatt for a single phase immersion. And if it's your only source of heating your hot water, like it is for me at home, it's really important to have some control over it because otherwise you could burn out the immersion element or the relay or the fuse spur it's using. But also, it doesn't really allow for much management of the energy consumption. Now, the RGBW dimmer, of course, we're not going to connect this directly to the immersion, but you can use something called a solid state relay, which allows for variable control of a load. So what this will do is proportionally control the current that flows through this relay, limiting how much power that appliance can draw. So instead of, 13 amps, 14 amps roughly for an immersion heater, and that's going to be drawing 3 kilowatt. Instead, we could be looking at closer to 5 or 6 amps by proportionally controlling it through the RGBW dimmer, and that would then allow us to reduce the power consumption. Now, of course, that means it's going to be technically less effective in heating a hot water tank. So that seems like a silly thing to do. But What's worth remembering is if a customer has renewables, so many people have solar panels, and solar panels were sold to them as this will save you energy. Now, yes, technically it will, but if your solar panels are generating sun during the day when you're at work and you're at home consuming energy in the evening when there is no sun, it's kind of counterproductive. So, of course, you could do things manually with set schedules and things like this. But if things would happen in an automated fashion, which of course, hopefully everyone watching is going to be a fan of, that would be awesome. So what we could do is use things like the Loxone Energy Manager function block, integrating things like your solar PV and solar PV inverter, battery storage, and everything else, monitoring the consumption of the property. And when we're potentially going to be exporting and we no longer need to charge any batteries, we can now proportionally control our immersion heater and use that as a thermal store as opposed to a physical battery. A question from Daniel in the chat. Nico has already answered it, but it might be worth mentioning. Can you connect more than one immersion heater to the RGBW dimmer? Yes. So if you wanted to have more than one solid state relay, so one per immersion heater, you certainly can. Remember, with the RGBW dimmer, it's constant voltage. So the channel on the furthest left is always 24 volts. And then the channels, well, technically goes 4, 3, 2, 1 from left to right, or right to left is 1, 2, 3, 4, then your constant voltage. We're technically switching the ground. So just keep that in mind. You're going to want a common bar for your 24 volts. Now, of course, the RGBW dimmer Air and DIN rail form and the compact form are fundamentally the same in terms of functionality. It's just form factor and where you can locate it. Personally, at home, I've got a Miniserver compact and then an RGBW dimmer next to it, which is conveniently next to my consumer unit and where my hot water tank is. So it allows for great control. Usually with retrofitting, you're looking at a Miniserver Go, like something like this, and you somewhat can't like have your immersion heater set next to it. But what you can do instead is have a RGBW compact dimmer more local to your hot water tank in a small enclosure, and that's going to enable control proportionally. And again, it's communicating over air. So something as small as a Miniserver compact and a stereo, well, this is a stereo extension, but an RGBW dimmer, say, is such a small setup that you can not just do energy management, but you can do so much more because you've got air in the Miniserver compact. We've got tree turbo, so much more. Now let's look at some of the other products we've got here. Smart Socket. Smart Socket is great for controlling space heaters. Space heaters are very rarely above 13 amps, which is what the relay in Smart Socket is rated to. It's got temperature sensors in there. So if you want to monitor the room temperature, you can. Of course, if this is right next to the space heater, it's going to give you a somewhat more inaccurate reading, but it's still going to give you a measurement if necessary. It's got energy monitoring in there, so you can see how much energy and power that space heater is actually consuming, which is going to be very valuable to understanding how much money you're spending and vice versa. Of course, hopefully we all know that the valve actuator exists and we can use it for controlling the likes of a radiator or an underfloor heating manifold. Then we have the AC Control Air, which is one of the newer products to our lineup. So instead of having some more involved complex control, whether that be through maybe Modbus or whether it's through infrared, we can take over the control for the big brands like Mitsubishi, Heavy Industries, and Electric, Daikin, and they've got two versions, Fujitsu, Gree, and Toshiba. It's just a plug and play into the PCB. Now, this is only one-way communication. We're just telling it what to do, so you can't get information back from it. But really, it's the same with like if you had a remote. If you had a remote that came with the air conditioner, you're not getting feedback from it. You're just telling it what to do. So it's a great application for this. Now, if the customer already has to control, whether it's a handheld remote or whether it's a wall controller, remember that the AC control air is now bringing this AC unit into Loxone. And then with the benefits of the intelligent room controller, we know from our case studies and like testing from personal installations, offices, partner projects, that you can expect to be between a 25 to 30, if not more percent reduction in energy consumption from your climate control by controlling it with Loxone. That's of course mainly done through the intelligent room controller and some finer tweaks here and there. But the AC control air is now what's bringing your AC unit into Loxone. Of course, there's going to be some AC units that you may come across that aren't available from the AC controller. So it could be like Samsung or it could be LG. Whereas with things like this, the Modbus Air is what's great. The Modbus Air allows for control of one Modbus device. So you can integrate things like other AC units, or whether it's a heat pump or a boiler that you want to have some higher level of control. With Modbus, you can get two-way communication. So not only defining what the unit needs to do, but also get information back, perhaps error codes and the state of it. And the Modbus Air is perfect for this. Yeah, so now let's look at what else we've got here. So the multi-extension air. The multi-extension air is, I think, such an underrated product. It has 8 16 amp relays that you could use for switching anything, but more specifically for heating and cooling. If you think how, we'll say conventionally, how wiring centers are done conventionally. And the reason why I say that is because we all know the real way is to do it through Loxone. But you're going to come across instances where perhaps that wiring center is failing or failed, or the customer wants their system to run more efficiently. The multi-extension air is what's allowing that, because you can just replace it like for like. You just need to power it with 24 volts. You could be lucky and find that there's a 24-volt power supply already there. You now have 8 relays for controlling valves, actuators, pumps, you name it. It can be done through the multi-extension air. You have digital inputs, so you can look at the state of the valve to see if it's actually open. So if you have a 2-port valve or a 3-port valve, you want to make sure that it's actually fully moving before you run a pump or something like this. You have 12 digital inputs on the multi-extension air to allow for this, which is great. You have a one-wire interface. So if you need to monitor floor temperature, now you could be lucky and you find that they've already got one-wire temperature probes in the floor if you are doing underfloor heating or in the room, and you can take over the monitoring from the multi-extension air. So it's like having a one-wire extension all in one. But let's say you wanted to monitor the hot water tank temperature and you wanted to put a one-wire temperature probe in it. Perfect, because we've already got one-wire capabilities on the extension. Finally, we've got the RGBW output. So this is essentially like the RGBW dimmer air. And you can then use this again to potentially control proportionally something like an immersion heater. Or if you want to have some LED strip in your boiler room or plant room, you can. But such a great addition. And we'll come up for some more use cases in a moment for the multi-extension air. Remember, if you have any questions about something that I've mentioned, please pop it in the chat. I'm more than happy to go through it. Moving on to audio. So with audio and Loxone, this is probably one of the topics and one of the product groups that we can do that has one of the biggest potentials. So of course we changed the game with Loxone Audio with the audio server nearly 4 years ago, and continued to innovate, and we of course will do. Now, of course, with the audio server, it was initially looked at as unconventional to have such a low power rating of 18 watts per channel. But really, you've got to listen to believe it. So if we look at the audio server and what it's capable of, we've got line in, line out, SPDIF, and your 4 amplifier channels. So line in could be coming from a TV or a record player or something like this. Line out could go to an active speaker like a subwoofer. SPDIF could go to the likes of a digital amplifier. And then, of course, you've got your passive speaker outputs. Now, you may be thinking, Well, this is involving running cable, and this is a retrofit webinar. So how are we going to do this? So if you think about, and this is going to be more residential for a moment, think about in a house where you've got an attic. You could put the um, audio server in the attic. If you have network up there, I guess not necessarily usual, but if you had network up there, then fantastic. Um, and or you could use a power line adapter, for example, to enable communication from the audio server down to your Miniserver Go, maybe by the router. And then because it's in the attic, easily wiring speaker cable to bedrooms and bathrooms on a first floor or second floor is much easier. You could have multiple audio servers in the property. Now, this is still going to involve extra cabling, which is possible. You can retrofit cables if you wanted to, but if you wanted to still cable but a little bit less, you could look at decentralized stereo extensions. So instead of having the stereo extension in the panel next to the audio server or next to the Miniserver compact, you could put them next to the speaker. Now, of course, this means that instead of having two speakers, you might just have the one, but then this is now reducing your cabling effort significantly. But then if you have two speakers in the room, still having the stereo extension local to the room could be found much more valuable. Let's say you have a speaker back box, you could put the stereo extension in the speaker back box or a small Wago box. Remember, with speakers, because they're so much bigger, you've got such a great access entry into the ceiling void, or of course, do it from the other side in the attic, that having space and putting things like smaller enclosures like a Wago box is so much easier. So decentralized stereo extensions. And this then leads me on to commercial, because in commercial, we've all come across things like 100-volt line systems, and having something like a stereo extension more local to the speaker is essentially almost mimicking this. So instead of having a speaker cable per speaker centrally back to wherever the stereo extension is, you could run a tree cable from the central location, whether that's a Miniserver compact or whether that's an audio server, and wire it exactly like you would with tree for stereo extensions. Just note that tree turbo is different to tree, so it must be a dedicated cable. And your limit is 150 meters instead of the 500 from tree, because it's like Ethernet over two cores. And this means now that you can essentially mimic a 100-volt line system with Loxone and have even more features, save so much more energy. We can see that from the comparison, you could be looking at anything between 40 and 90% energy saving from just using Loxone for the audio solution in comparison to your other Class D amplifiers, which are driven by AC supplies with inefficient power supplies. You could be looking at other AB amplifiers, your more conventional multi-room audio or AV amplifiers. And finally, your 100-volt line systems. Loxone is always going to be so much more efficient. And we've got several graphs to show you this. So if you have got a potential project for this, please get in contact. We can help you, because ultimately, seeing the big cost of what the install is going to be could become daunting to the customer. But if we look at introducing what the return on investment is going to be, the additional features, this is what's going to be your selling point. Of course, reduce cabling. Now, if you wanted to hear the speakers, so if you're not sure and you want to look at your satellite speaker, if you want to look at the Install 7 speaker or the Install 10 speaker, and you want to compare it to something else you would have otherwise offered, please come and visit us. You're more than welcome to come and listen and experience what we've got here. And of course, we've got more than just our install and regular lineup. We've also got our quadral hi-fi speakers as well, which you're more than welcome to experience, all of them driven through the audio server. And I can't vouch for it enough. And finally, before we move on from audio, remember the Miniserver Compact has Tree Turbo. You don't need an audio server for audio. You can use a Miniserver Compact with Tree Turbo. Of course, you've got 10 maximum stereo extensions still, but you can have up to 10 stereo extensions per Miniserver compact or 10 stereo extensions per audio server. And of course, if you're bus wiring it or wiring in Tree Turbo, it's much better. Just note, of course, you don't have any line inputs, but unless you're having a record player or a TV or something like this, it's not really that important. So just keep that in mind. Miniserver Compact is amazing. It has air built in as well, and it has your built-in relays, so two 16-amp relays. I'm using them for my immersion heater at home, in addition to the modulating it with the RGBW dimmer. Yeah, fantastic Miniserver choice there. Access control. Several of our partners install access control. Now, this could be with Loxone, or whether this could be with another brand out there. Now, access control with Loxone, we know opens up for so much more with integration of different aspects of the building. But if you look at the like a cost to performance ratio, if you look at just general cost exercise, you'll find that the Loxone intercom and the Loxone access solution will work out much more cost effective and much more feature rich. So Loxone intercom is a PoE device. We don't need to go over that. But what's important to remember is things like the tree branch on the intercom. So you don't need to have a LAN cable with PoE just for the intercom, then a tree cable for things like the peripherals or use air. It has a tree branch built in. Note it's only got a 3-watt power supply output. You can't link another power supply, but you can connect things like your NFC code touch, Nano 2 relay tree. So you can even use tree devices, even though it's a retrofit installation. Then you've got things like the Nano IO controlling gates, perhaps, instead of using instead of using things like a Nano 2 relay tree, you can use it with gates in the little gate enclosure box. Spencer, you asked, would the intercom work on point to point over 50 meters? You certainly can. I set it up recently, I think either over a distance of 50 meters. So if you are using some radio, what's it called? Transmitters and receivers to get it over a distance, if you have got a gate and running a cable is not an option, that is also possible, as long as they've got a clear line of sight. Yeah, so the Nano IO, great for gates. You've got 2 relays, maybe one for pedestrian, one for a vehicle gate, or one for open, one for close. You've got digital inputs for request to exit, status of the gate in terms of the position. So much flexibility from just one small little device. RGBW dimmer, I think you got it by this point. It's a great product, not just lighting. You can use it for everything. So the RGBW dimmer has got 4 outputs, which can be individually controlled. We've so far been talking about proportionally controlling them from 0 to 100%, whether that's for power consumption or whether that's for dimming lighting. But we know that PWM is just on and off, not just so similar to a relay. Now, if we're switching something which is 12 or 24 volts and with a current of less than 2.1 amps, you can use the RGBW dimmer. So thinking of like mag locks, strike locks, lockers, so spring-loaded latch locks and solenoid locks, you can drive with the RGBW dimmer. The cost of a relay or like a Nano IO is £110. So cost per relay is about £55. The RGBW dimmer is £75 and has 4 outputs, so the cost per output is about £17. So much more cost efficient, and it's already at the correct voltage. This then leads me on to things like lockers. So we have a row of lockers here, which we have 12 on each side, so a total of 24, all driven via the RGBW dimmer into a latch lock, a spring-loaded latch lock. And it works perfectly. Really, really good solution, and again, thinking outside the box. But then taking that one step further, hopefully we've all come across or seen an Amazon locker before, where you go and collect a parcel if you're not in. You can do exactly this with Loxone. Maybe not for a scale of like Amazon, But if you think of like apartment buildings, every apartment building you go into, by the front door, you've got some ugly post boxes where everyone's got a key. People lose the keys, and it's just hassle. What if we could come up with a solution that this is all on the same access control system as Loxone? So for the front door. So if you think the front door, they've got Loxone access control with the intercom and the NFC code touch. Maybe the apartments have NFC code touches and access control with the key fob or something like this. But then if you can also use the same key fob to open your locker or your post box, that could be even better. You could have one small one just for letters and small parcels, and you could have one bigger one where if you do have, if you're expecting a larger parcel and you're not going to be in, you could allow for a single-use access code for the postman to open the locker and pop it in. Then you know your parcel's safe and nobody from your building could be tampering or temporarily borrowing it. And then, of course, drawers as well. So in businesses where there are critical documents perhaps stored, you could use some solenoid locks on drawers and again drive them from the RGBW dimmer. Because of the flexibility of replacing existing systems with locks on access control, you can do it without disruption, whether it's using existing cabling or whether it's using air. You've got so many different options. Then what leads me on to the third-party smart locks. So coming across electric locks in commercial buildings, really common, things like mag locks, strike locks, you name it. Residentially, not so common. So we've all got the multi sort of things like multi-point locks or deadbolts, things like this in our homes or night latches. And having electric options is really inconvenient or it's expensive. So we need to look at other options out there that we could then control. So things like some third-party smart locks, maybe Nuki or I think there's a company that makes the I think Utreon, Ultreon. I don't know, I'm looking at Nico to tell me the name. Ution, which have customized a special locking mechanism to fit a UK multi-point lock. And then you've got a company called Teddy, which are again a little bit more compact. Again, great integration with Loxone. Note that these sorts of things are also reliant on a cloud-based API. And of course, that's opening up to the internet. So do bear that in mind, especially when privacy and security is quite a big, important part of Loxone. So we can't really guarantee things like that, but it is really important that you are aware of these sorts of things out there on the market. Then looking for other options like a night latch. You could look at something like a Yale electric night latch, which you could then integrate as well. So many different options. Okay, now energy. So I mentioned at the beginning that we'll be looking at energy and the price cap is something that's recently changed. So the latest price cap as of this month is now 24 pence per kilowatt hour. And this is residential. Now, of course, being residential, you may think, okay, well, that then removes the target market for me. However, remember that commercial is not affected by this. So your restaurants, your offices, your hotels, you name it, they are still paying astronomical prices. So energy management is still extremely important. Over the last few years, we've had so much more contact with these sorts of potential customers, and oh yeah, we're already doing energy management. When you dig a little bit deeper, we actually find out that they're monitoring their energy. And we're all monitoring our energy. We've got a smart meter, or we might have some other CT clamp or something. Monitoring the energy is one thing. Giving visibility is important and analysis. Unless you're actually doing something about it, what's the point? So management and reducing the base load is really important. Loads of people always go towards the peaks because they think, oh, it's peaked up to like 5, 6 kilowatt. We need to do something about it. Well, no, that's you boiling the kettle or cooking dinner or something like this. But the constant base load is what's drawing your energy. I don't know what the latest calculation would be, but if we take the old price cap, 1 watt on standby, 24/7, 365 days, equates to £3 a year. So if you now think around your office or around your home, how many things just on standby are drawing 1 watt? It could be the LED at the bottom of your computer monitor or underneath your TV. It could be the display on your which displaying the time on your microwave. These are all adding up, and that's where your energy bill is coming from, not boiling the kettle. Oh, that might influence a little bit, depends on how much tea you drink. So this is really important to take into consideration. And when it comes to monitoring, naturally, the first thing to do was look at the main incoming supply. How much are we drawing now? But really, monitoring the main supply is only telling you your total. It doesn't tell you what is consuming the energy. So monitoring individual appliances is really important to get an understanding of what is actually drawing this consumption. So things like I mentioned there, things like in an office, monitors, printers, fridges, AC units. These are things that could be drawing things on standby, which really don't need to happen. If you think about with a fridge, for example, the compressor could be on maybe every 10 minutes, and that could be on for again maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And if that's the case, where a fridge is empty because the staff have eaten all the food or drank everything out of it, and overnight you're now running an empty fridge, and an empty fridge is so much more expensive to run than a full fridge because of the mass of all the products inside the fridge are holding cool energy, which are then maintaining that temperature. So switching it off at night and turning it back on again a couple of hours in the morning before everyone comes into the office will save a lot of energy. So these are things that you should be looking at and monitoring. So we've got an energy case, we've got so a mini server, a couple of analog input extensions with CT clamps that you guys are welcome to borrow for energy audits, where primarily in the commercial sector, where you can monitor up to 8 tails in a consumer unit. And then you could look at using smart sockets with the Miniserver Go at monitoring more individual loads to understand where this base load is coming from and how we can reduce it. And that's something we can help you with. So let's move on. The multi-extension air, as I said, an underrated product, and here is one, for example. So the multi-extension air is an air device, despite it being an extension. And I think this is potentially what's overlooked. And this is essentially a relay extension, although it's just 8 relays instead of 14, DI extension with 12 digital inputs, 1 wire extension, and a RGBW dimmer, all in one device. So with that in mind, this can take over so many other things. Now, whether you put it, even if it's a new installation, not a retrofit, you could use the mini server. Sorry, not the mini server. You could use the multi-extension air in the main panel. But for retrofit, this opens up the potential for so much more, whether it's outside lighting, and putting this in a shed, whether it's an external garage, whether it's an annex. You need to do some pool control with the relays, the 1 wire temperature monitoring, some LED driving, or some valve control and monitoring of digital inputs, a heating wiring center like we mentioned earlier. This covers it really well. And remember, this antenna can be replaced with an external antenna. So let's say that this is far away from where the mini server is. You can put an external antenna on it, which is going to increase the signal. And if it's in an outbuilding, of course, you've got the fabric of the building that could be influencing the air signal. So an external antenna on the outside of the building, which is also IP rated, could be a great option. So some facts and figures on air, because loads of people are potentially afraid of using air because of what it's wireless at the end of the day. And some people straight away will go, it's Wi-Fi or it's internet and things like this. And it's far from it. So Loxone Air is Firstly, not anything to do with Wi-Fi and nothing to do with your internet. Loxone Air is based on an 868 megahertz frequency. We're all used to hearing gigahertz, but megahertz is much lower, means that the range, the distance is much greater than what Wi-Fi would potentially be. It could be perceived as slower, but the data packets are so small, it doesn't make a difference. So it's just on, off, or variable temperature control, etc. But benefits to air is neighboring air bases. So if you have a block of apartments or housing development, neighboring air bases that are on the same frequency will support your installation, which could be really beneficial. If the air device can't reach the airbase, it will automatically re-establish a new path with new hops. So between other devices. Now, a hop is you have the airbase, and then you have an air device, and then another air device. And this air device in the middle could be used as a hopping point to get back to the airbase if this device at the furthest away can't directly see the airbase. So up to 5 hops between devices. Permanently powered devices can act as a repeater. So this could be permanently powered with 24 volts or 230 volts, depending on the device. Obviously, don't power a touch pure with 230 volts. But this also means that you're increasing your signal strength. Be careful with Faraday cages or metal enclosures. If you put like the Miniserver Compact into a metal enclosure, it's got an airbase built in. You can't put an external antenna. So this would be a Faraday cage. Keep that in mind. Of course, if you need to put it in a metal enclosure, consider things like a tree-to-air bridge or maybe an external airbase with an external antenna. Just keep that in mind. If you're not switching any mains, you don't really need to have, or if there's no mains in the panel, you don't really need to have a metal enclosure anyway. Same goes for the airbase. External antenna, always consider it if you have got a metal enclosure because it will increase your signal strength significantly. A question we get a lot is, what is the range of air? What's the distance? And that's, of course, a really hard question to answer because wireless frequencies are always going to be influenced by external factors like the fabric of the building, what's going on around you, whether there's train signals or whether there is military bases, government buildings around the area. This can impact wireless frequencies. So what's worth also considering though is ideal testing environments. So what we did as Loxone was we set up an external antenna with an airbase, and then we had a shading actuator, and we measured how far away we can get, still maintaining a good signal strength until we obviously didn't. And we can still get a good signal strength from the airbase 300 meters away. Now, this is line of sight in outside. So this was tested outside line of sight. But that puts a perspective that air really is that powerful. So you don't need to be afraid that the signal strength is going to negatively impact you. Of course, fabric of the buildings, foil back insulation, concrete walls, steel and things like that is always going to play a part in it. But as long as we are taking into consideration permanently powered devices, the hops and things like that, you should be fine. And the external antenna is IP50 rated. And finally, the Air Diagnostics Tool. The Air Diagnostics Tool is such a powerful tool that you can use within your installations. So this here is an example of our office, and you can see here we've got some in the green, some in the amber, and some in the red, which is normal. Of course, ultimately we want everything in the green, but this can show us a good idea and get a good understanding of what's actually going on. So it could be that you find a device is draining battery really quickly. You could find that it's not reacting to commands very quickly. And this will give you an idea of what's going on. So you can see here, we have several different smart sockets, which are hopping between each other. Then we have nano IOs, and then we have a room comfort sensor here. And these signal strengths, so if we scroll down a bit, you can see the signal strength to the shredder smart socket is really good. But then the signal strength between the shredder smart socket and the IR control air is poor. So you just need to bear that in mind. The IR control air isn't showing you the signal strength from the IR control air to the airbase. It's between that and the smart socket. So the where things are red, this is where we need to take into account, could there be improvements made? So you'll notice here I've got a couple of devices which are showing as offline. Now this could be batteries, but it also could be that at the time of running the test, the device wasn't reacting to signal. So for example, I know for a fact the front door where a door and window contact is online. I know that these present sensors are also online, but because these two rooms aren't used very often, they haven't reported recently. This smart socket here isn't plugged in. This one here, I think, has actually run out of battery. But this means that I can then get a good understanding of what's going on. And same here, you can see a full idea of signal strength, when last data packets were received, the version they were on, their location, you name it, it's all here. So this will hopefully tell you what's happening. So if I find, for example, this one here, where's the IR control air? Was this IR control air hopping? No, it's not. Let's find the IR control air in Stockholm. Here we go. So this is the IR control air. You can see it's hopping. You can see the signal strength isn't great. You can see the sending and receiving signal strength as well. So take this into consideration and you will be able to smash your air installations. Cool. I think that pretty much wraps up my hour-long webinar. Yeah. So hopefully all of you learned something, especially in the topic of air and retrofitting. Retrofitting is really important because not only is retrofitting relevant for new installations, but also important for like installations where you're adding. So you could be have an existing tree installation, you want to add a couple of extra things. You can with air. We've got products like the tree to air bridge or the airbase extension, or things where you can add air devices on the fly. You can pair air devices from the app. So you could even get your customer to pair the device from the app themselves rather than you doing it through config, and then you just do the configuration at your leisure. Yeah, I think it's really powerful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in contact with us, whether it's now or whether it's on the phone to the partner coaches. More than welcome to. But enjoy your lovely Thursday evening, and I will think I'll see you in a couple of weeks.